Hello, everyone. This is Jennifer. We'll be recording this visit. We're waiting for Louise to arrive. We're looking forward to having a great time. Hey everyone, be sure not to share your screens. We don't need to use video. We'll be recording this session. We're just waiting for Luis, and I think Luis is tied up, so thank you for your patience.
Hello. Hi, Jen. Can you hear me, Jen?
Luis, welcome. We're happy to see you.
Hi. For some reason, I had the time wrong. Sorry about that.
Oh, that's okay. We got a small but mighty crew. We're recording this, but we want to make sure open it live if people. Some people prefer to listen live, and I know sometimes it's nice to have some people to ask questions too.
Sure, absolutely. Let me just get my iPad shared to my computer, and then we'll be ready to go.
Okay.
Is an hour still okay?
Yeah.
All right. Just let me get the iPad configured here so that it's shared.
Although
That's
I think we're set automatically to record until 4:15.
Okay. All right. I'll try to be quick then.
There's always more information to share. We're so happy you started.
Well, and there's
on the side for you and help folks with some technical difficulties on the side.
Sounds good. So let me share my screen, and then I will set a few things up here so that I can see the chat as well. So let me see. You should be able to see my screen in just a second. There we go. Are you able to see my slides? And you can edit the beginning of this, right? You still hear me, Jen?
I still have you. I'll mute myself so I don't get in the way.
Okay. So I was saying we can delete the beginning of this, right?
Oh, sure.
All right. So here we go. I'm going to launch my slides and then we'll get started.
Okay, great.
All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this webinar where we're going to be looking at switch control for iOS devices, such as your iPad, your iPhone, iPod Touch. My name is Luis Perez. You can actually follow me on Twitter if you're interested in continuing the conversation. My Twitter handle is @IonAccess. That's EYEONAXS. And I also have a website where you can learn more about my work. It's luisperezonline.com. There is a handout for this session, so I want to make sure you all have this. It's I created a short URL for it, and it's bit.ly, then / switch control overview, and that's case sensitive. So make sure that you enter that. Each of the words has a capital letter in front of it. So switch control overview with a capital letter for each of those words. So I'll leave that up on the screen for just a second, just in case you need to write that down. We'll also share that in the chat. So you'll have it there as well.
I just shared it in the chat for them, Luis. It should be all set. Thank you.
Great. Perfect. Thanks so much, Jen. All right. So the other resource, in addition to the handout, I have a book that I co-wrote with an expert switch user named Christopher Hills, who's based in Australia. And it's called Handsfree. And I also have a link for where you can access that book, bit.ly /LFP ebooks. So that is a book that it's interactive. It has videos embedded throughout the book, along with step-by-step tutorials. And then you can also see switch access being used in a variety of contexts by Christopher himself, who was one of the authors. So the book itself is a great example of what can be created by a switch user when they're given the opportunity to do so, because Christopher created a lot of the visual layout of the book, and then he edited all of the videos except for the tutorials, which I did. All right, so when we think about switch access on iOS devices, we're really thinking about two things: switch accessible apps, and then the actual switch control feature, which is one of the built-in accessibility features of iOS. So today we're actually going to focus on the latter, switch control. With the switch accessible apps, the switch access is basically configured inside of the app. It's built into the app. And so that means as long as you have that app open, you'll be fine. You'll be able to use the switches to navigate within that app. But once you exit out of the app, then you don't have access to switch access. So with switch control, it's more comprehensive. It provides access throughout the interface, and then it also works within apps. So it's just a little bit more comprehensive. And I think that distinction will become clearer as we go forward here. All right, so I always want to begin with a few key terms just to make sure we're all on the same page. And then you're going to have a short quiz, but don't worry, all of you are going to pass this quiz. It's really easy if you're paying attention. So the first thing I want to ask you is, what is switch access technology? So go ahead and take just a second in the chat and let me know, what do you think switch access is, if you had to create your own definition? Jen, you're not allowed to participate in this.
Oh, good. No, I will keep quiet and let these folks learn and share what they think.
Sure. Or you can just think it to yourself. You don't necessarily have to answer, but I would appreciate seeing your answers in the chat. Either way, I just want you to reflect and create a personal definition. What is switch access? If you've seen it before, how would you describe it to somebody else?
And folks who are new to using this type of webinar platform, if you just hover your mouse or hover down your trackpad down to the bottom, you'll see the little chat icon or share icon or participant icon. Click on chat if you don't see your chat choices now.
Let's see if we get 1 or 2 responses here. If not, no worries. I will provide you with one. And this is just one definition. There are many out there. But for me, switch access is an alternative access method where we basically replace the need for a person with a cognitive or motor disability to use the keyboard, the mouse, or touchscreen gestures to interact with their computer or device. All right, so it's an alternative access method where we're basically looking for a replacement for the keyboard, the mouse, or of course now we're using touchscreen devices and that rely on gestures, and not everyone can perform those gestures. So we need an alternative for those gestures. And so that's basically what switch access does. Typically when we think about switch access, we think about somebody pushing a button. So that's what the item on the left is. It's a switch device. They come in a variety of different shapes, sizes, pressure sensitivity. So there's a lot of variability in the terms of switches that you will see out there. But when we think about switch access, this is probably the first thing that comes to mind. It's some sort of button that you press or touch in order to perform an action on your computer or device. And today we're going to be talking primarily about mobile devices. But there are other methods of activating switches or using switches. On the right, we see a young lady actually blowing into a sip and puff device. So here she will blow into that, that device, and it will be the equivalent of pressing a button with a more traditional switch button or a switch device. So that's a very simplified definition of switch access. I'm sure you can find many others if you go online and look it up. Now, a switch device can't communicate with your iPad or iPhone or other iOS device directly. It needs to go through a switch interface. So the switch interface basically will translate those switch presses or if you're using a sip and puff device, whenever you blow into it, it will translate your actions into something the device can understand. And there's two different types that we can use. We can use a wireless switch interface, like the one on the left here. That's the one that I'm going to be using today. It's from a company called AbleNet, and it's the Bluetooth. And basically, it communicates with my device using Bluetooth, just like many keyboards and other headphones and things like that. And then the one on the right is something that I've used in the past called the Hook Plus from, again, AbleNet, but there's other companies out there that make these. These are just the two that I have on hand here. That's a wired one where it connects to your device using the Lightning port. And so there are advantages and disadvantages to each of these. Wireless, obviously, you get rid of the wires, so it's a simpler setup. But then again, sometimes you have lag or you have some interference. And then there's also some places where you're not allowed to use Bluetooth. So in that situation, the wired one could come in handy. So again, these devices are basically taking those switch presses, those switch activation actions, and translating them into a command that you can perform on the device. Now, on iOS, we have three different switch sources we can use. We can use the iPad screen. So essentially, we could tap the screen, and that would be the same as pressing a switch. We can use external switch sources, which I'm going to be using today. Or, this is really cool, but it's really makes sense just for demos at this point, is you can use the camera. So you can perform, you can move your head to the left or to the right, and that would be the equivalent of pressing a switch. So it works in some cases, but you have to have good lighting. You have to have the device on a stand so that it's stable. And so I limit that just to cool demos rather than using it for everyday access. So we're going to focus primarily on the iPad screen and then external switch sources today. And then once we get over how we're going to connect to the device, then we need to select switch access method. So we have two of the primary ones. There's also a third that was introduced in a recent version of iOS. But these are the two primary ones that I see people use. Auto scanning or single switch scanning. And I'm using the official terms that you'll see in the iOS devices. There may be other terms that you'll see out there in the field. And then manual scanning or dual switch scanning. And for that, obviously, you'll need two switches. So let's take a look here. Well, actually, before that, there's also two scanning modes. So item mode is probably what you've seen if somebody turns on switch access or switch control on iOS for the first time. And so you'll see a rectangle move around on the screen. And it's a very sequential way to access the information on the screen. You'll move from top to bottom, left to right. It's very similar to the way you navigate with a screen reader in some ways. And in fact, you're using some of the same underlying accessibility features or interfaces. And then point mode. So point mode is a special mode. And basically, you'll see a bar move around on the screen. And it'll move around on the screen a couple of times until you can refine your selection. And so why would you use point mode over item mode? Well, remember what I said about item mode being very sequential and moving from top to bottom, left to right. So with point mode, we can actually sort of speed up navigation because we can select any point or any point on the screen by going directly to that point on the screen, because we can use the two bars to sort of dial in our selection. And so if I'm reading a web page and there's a link at the bottom of the page that I want to select, I don't have to wait to navigate sequentially from top to bottom. I can just go right to that link, and using the crosshairs, which is basically what this is, I can make a selection at that point. All right, so are you all ready for this quiz? And I'll tell you what, Jen, you can participate in this one. So the first quiz item, just real quick quiz, is which of the two modes allows you to move directly to any part of the screen using just its coordinates? So go ahead and let me know in the chat. Is it item mode, A? Is it show numbers, B? or is it point mode? C. So in the chat, let me know A, B, or C.
We have a shy group. We won't record the chat for you, okay?
So what do you think, Jen? A, B, or C?
We have an answer from Alicia, point mode, C.
All right, you are correct. So point mode, again, you can use those bars to make a selection, and you can move to any point on the screen as needed. Thanks so much for that. Remember, the other one is item mode, and that's more sequential. That's the rectangle moves from top to bottom, left to right. All right, question number 2. Which mode would you choose if you only had one switch? Choose the best answer. A, manual scanning, B, point mode, or C, auto scanning. So let's see your response in the chat. Elizabeth can't be the only one. Let's see if somebody else will respond. All right, I think I've given you enough time to think it over. So I will let you know that the best answer in this case would be C, auto scanning. Because with auto scanning, the cursor is actually going to move on its own on the screen. And then all you have to do is when that cursor gets to the item that you want, you'll press the switch and you'll perform an action. That could be a simple tap to select the item, or it could be bringing up a menu for you to choose from a menu of options. Remember that for manual scanning, you'll need 2 switches. And then point mode, it's not a, it's a different thing. Point mode is more how you go about selecting items on the screen, whether sequentially or by choosing any point on the screen. All right, so hopefully you did okay with that quiz. We're all clear on the key terms. Now we're getting ready to get going here. So before we get going, I have an important safety announcement. So pay careful attention to this one. They always make these announcements on the plane, and these are really important for your safety. So I can't stress this enough. Before you start playing around with switch control on your iOS devices, you need to make sure that you enable the accessibility shortcut. And the way that you do that is you go to General, Accessibility, and then you'll locate the option for Accessibility Shortcut. And then what's really important here is that you make sure that only switch control is selected. So no other options should be selected in that menu or in that pane. What will happen once you have switch control enabled for the accessibility shortcut is that you can triple click your home button on, if your device has one. Some of them don't, but on the newer ones, you can also use the side button. Either one will work. And so you'll triple click that button and it will bring up a menu, or it will enable or disable an accessibility feature. So we want to make sure we have switch control as the only option here, because if you triple click the home or side button, it will toggle switch control on and off. If you have more than one option selected, right? So here's an example of where I've set it up correctly. So when I exit out of the accessibility shortcut pane, it will list switch control as the only option for the accessibility shortcut. If I didn't have it done correctly, it may say something like ask, right? For the accessibility shortcut. And when it says ask, if I triple click the home button or the side button, then this is what will happen. It will bring up a menu. And unfortunately, if you're having difficulty with switch control, then you're going to be stuck at this menu. You won't be able to turn it off. So really important to make sure you set up your accessibility shortcut correctly for the triple click option to turn it on and off. Now, there are some features in iOS that also use the triple click home option or triple click side button. Those are magnifier, which is for people with low vision, and then guided access, which is a method of locking the iPad into a single app. You may want to disable those temporarily, at least at first when you're exploring switch control, just so that there's no confusion. All right, so with that out of the way, hopefully you have your triple click home or side button configured correctly. Let's take a look at two different ways you can use switch access on iOS devices. The first one is auto scanning. And there's basically 3 steps for this. And I'm going to do it with the screen as a switch source first. So step 1, if you just want to get started, is add the screen as a switch source, or you could add a single switch, but we'll talk about that a little later. For now, we'll just focus on the screen. Then you'll enable auto scanning. So with auto scanning, there will be a cursor that will move around on the screen. And then when that cursor gets to the option you want to select, that's when you'll press the switch. And then this is just a preference of mine. I always enable auto tap. I highly recommend you do that for the tap behavior. Make sure that auto tap is the option you have selected. And the reason for that is the default action for switch control is to bring up what's called the scanner menu. And so when you press the switch at first, this menu will come up, and then you have to navigate through that menu to select, things like a tap or a gesture and so on. I personally prefer for that first action that happens when I press the switch to be just a tap, because that's what I do most of the time while I'm navigating in iOS. And then I can double tap the switch in order to bring up this menu if I want to access additional options. So auto tap it just saves you a little bit of time, since a tap is mostly what you're going to want to perform to select an app or turn off a feature and so on. All right, so let's see how this goes. I'm going to do a quick demo. Let me bring up my iPad. Give me a second here. Lots of moving parts when you have multiple devices. Tell you what, let's minimize that. Okay, you should be able to see my iPad screen there. Let me see if I can bring it full screen. All right, is that okay, Jen? Should look okay. All right, so here we go. We're going to first find out where switch control is available. So we're going to go into our settings. We're going to choose general, and then accessibility. That's where you find all of your accessibility options on your iOS devices. Then we're going to go down to interaction, and there we're going to find switch control. Now, by default on your device, you should already have one switch source. So you'll see that under switches, it lists the number 1. So if you tap on that option, you'll find full screen and then select item. If that's not the case, you can also go through the process of tapping on add new switch, choosing the screen, and then selecting an option like select for this. You shouldn't have to do that. You should already have the screen as your switch source by default, and the select item action as the one that's selected there. So with that enabled, that's the minimum that you need to be able to use switch control on iOS. So you have a switch source in the screen, and you have an action that you're going to perform. The next thing I want to do is choose the scanning style. And I want to make sure that that's set to auto scanning. That's how we're going to start here. And let me just mention one thing here. Auto scanning and manual scanning, there are some advantages and disadvantages to each of these two methods. For auto scanning, obviously, the cursor is going to move on its own. So there are fewer switch presses. But there's some timing requirements that you need to be aware of, and you need to consider when evaluating this with an individual learner. With manual scanning, you have a little bit more control over the timing, because you press one switch to advance and then the other to make a selection. But it does require more switch presses, so fatigue may be a factor. So as with everything, this is all individual. This is something you need to trial out and then make a determination. As I mentioned, there is a third scanning method, but I don't know too many people that use it. It's single switch step scanning, which is basically sort of a hybrid of the other two. So with this one, you'll keep pressing the switch, and then when you let go, after a specified amount of time, something happens. Either you make a selection or the menu comes up, depending on how you have it configured. So let's just stick with auto scanning and manual scanning for today, in the interest of time. And then, like I said, I generally like to set the tap behavior to auto tap. It just saves me a switch press. By default, when I tap the switch, it's going to make a selection for me. And then if I want to bring up the scanner menu, I can tap a second time or just double tap in quick succession. All right, so let's take a look at it. We have all configuration, right? We have switch source, we have determine our scanning style, and there's just as a preference, we've set our tap behavior. So I'll go ahead and turn on switch control. And there's our scanning cursor. It's moving around on the screen. And then I'm just gonna turn it off. So I'm gonna wait until it comes back around. And then when switch control is selected, I'll tap the screen. And then the same thing will happen. You'll see the cursor move around. When it gets to the option that I want to select, I'll tap the screen again, and that's it. So that's the basics of switch control with auto scanning. Now, I use the screen as a switch source because that's the easiest method, but there's other ways to do it as well. All right, let's go back to my presentation. I'll pause here, see if you have any questions for me. This is a quiet crowd, so I am guessing that I won't have too many questions. Or Jen, if you have a question that you want to add that you think people would want, would ask.
Louise, this is great. This is great information to keep sharing with folks. And we'll be sharing it with our other members of our team too. So
fabulous.
I'll be introverted today.
Yeah, so if there's anything that's not clear, Jen, just let me know and I can go back over it.
Okay, great.
So the other method is manual scanning. And again, it's 3 steps. So the step 1, here we're not going to use the screen as our switch source. I'm actually going to connect an interface. So step 1 is connecting that interface over Bluetooth. I'm going to use a Bluetooth one today. And most of you, believe it or not, already own a switch interface. Are you ready for it? It's a Bluetooth keyboard. So if you have a Bluetooth keyboard, it turns out you already own a switch interface because that's essentially what they are. They're just, they basically send a keyboard shortcut over to the device, and the device knows what to do when it hears that keyboard shortcut. So if you have a Bluetooth keyboard like this one, what you could do just for testing, right? So this is not what you're going to do with your actual learners. But if you want to learn switch control and you want to practice it before you go out and try it with your students, you can configure some of the arrow keys or the space bar, which has a bigger hit area, as a switch using your Bluetooth keyboard. So that's something that you can try, and I'll show you in a second how you add a switch source. So the first step basically is you need to connect that switch interface. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because the process is very similar to connecting any kind of Bluetooth device, like a keyboard or a headset. Once that device is connected, then step 2 is to add your switch sources. And finally, step 3 is to select your scanning style, which in this case will be manual scanning style. All right, so I'm going to exit again, and we'll go back to the iPad and take a look. All right, so I'm back again under general accessibility switch control. And now I need to add my switch sources. So what I'm going to do is go to switches. And by the way, I've already added my switch interface as a Bluetooth connection. So I'm going to skip that step for now. So what I'm going to do here is tap on add new switch. And this time we don't want the screen or the camera. We want to choose external. And then I'll press my switch button. And then I'll give this a name. And typically the first one, I'll call it something like picker. So that's the action that I'm usually going to perform with this button. I'm going to pick something. And then I'll save that. And then I want to select the action that will be performed when I tap that switch. So I'm going to choose select item. Now, the other thing I could do, which is really nice, and this has been added in a more recent version of iOS, is you can select the long press action. And I love using long press because it gives me a lot of flexibility. With long press, I will tap the switch once to perform the primary action. And then if I tap and hold it for a certain amount of time, I could perform a secondary action. So it basically gives you two switches in one, if you will. And a lot of times what I'll do is I'll set the long press for this first one to the home button. So now if I tap it once, it will select the item. If I tap and hold, do that long press, it's going to take me home on my device. So that's the first one. And because I'm going to be using manual scanning, I want to add another switch. I'm going to choose external again. I'll press the button that I want to configure as a switch source. And then this one, I'm going to choose stepper. This is why it's going to advance that cursor for me. So I'm going to do move to previous or move to next item, sorry, here. And for now, I'm not going to add a long press to this one, but I could do that as well if I wanted to. I could set the long press to Siri, for example. In fact, let's do that. I'll do the long press and we'll choose Siri. All right, so we should be all set. You see that I have the stepper and the picker configured here, so I can use two buttons. But in reality, I can perform 4 different actions with these 2 buttons because I can press it once, each of the buttons, or I can press and hold and use the long press feature. Now, the next thing is I'm going to set my scanning style, and I'm going to set that to manual scanning since I have 2 switch sources. So now let's take a look at how this behaves. I'll turn it on. Nothing's happening with the cursor, right? Because I have to press the switch to advance the cursor. So I will press the switch that I configure as my stepper. And you can see how I have control now. The cursor doesn't move until I press the switch. When it gets to the option that I want, then I will pick my other, or I will tap my other switch, which will be the one that I've configured as the picker. And again, I'll perform the same steps. I'll press one switch to advance the cursor and the other switch to make a selection. Let me turn that on again and show you the long press. So remember, we've configured one of these switches so that if I press and hold, it will perform a different action. So what I'll do is I'll just move around a little bit. It doesn't matter where I am. What I can do is with my picker, I can tap and hold. And after a short delay, it will go to the home screen. And I can navigate throughout the home screen in the same way. So in here, what I can do is, you can see now that that whole row is selected. If I tap the picker, then I'll basically go into the different sections of that row, like so. You'll notice that there's also a border around it that has those dotted lines. When that's selected, that basically means go back a level, right? So if you're in a menu or if you're in a folder, if you select that option, it's basically like going back. All right, so I don't want to go back. I want to go inside one of these groups. And again, I'm just drilling down, right? So I'm advancing with one button, making a selection with the other one. Now, the default action, remember, I have it set to auto tap right now. So when I first press the switch, it's just going to make a selection. But the other thing I can do is I can double tap, and that brings up my scanner menu. And within the scanner menu, I can navigate in much the same way. I can go by row and then make a selection within that row. And let's say that I want to go home. Well, then I'll select that option. You'll see that it's filled in a way so that you can see that it's selected. And then I can select it, and that would be the same as going home. All right, so let me go back to settings. And we will turn off switch control. This may take a little bit of practice, but again, once you do it a couple of times, it will become a little bit more intuitive. And let me go back to the presentation again. So any questions about that? The manual scanning? Jan, anything that comes to mind that I may have left out or that may be confusing?
No, so helpful, Louise. I mean, step scanning is certainly my go-to. I'm always looking for that mover and that chooser. So this is great, really nice way to lay it out for everyone who might be new to switch scanning. So this is excellent. Thanks.
Sure. And so just remember, you sometimes have to sort of drill down. You'll select the row and then make a selection with one of the buttons, go into that row, navigate through the different icons or apps and so on, and then continue drilling down. In fact, here's a little video. Hopefully this will play over Zoom. I think it will. We'll see. But here you can see it in action because I know you can't see it when I do it on the screen. So let's see, that should be playing. There it goes. So you can see I'm pressing the switch to advance, and then I'm pressing the other switch to make a selection. And then I'll do the same thing once I'm inside a row. I'll advance and then make a selection with the other one. So stepper and picker, those are the names that make sense to me, but you can use whatever names help you remember which switch does what. And then within the app, it's the same actions. You advance the cursor, and then you make a selection. And look, here we're taking a photo. I look a lot younger then. Boom. So that was just kind of a quick demo for you to get a sense of what it looks like with the actual switches. Now, let's see how I'm doing on time. I'm actually doing pretty good. So point mode, as I mentioned, is special mode. It's only available through the scanner menu. So at this point, we're going to have to use the scanner menu. Here's a quick video of it for you. If not, I can always show it to you live. So here's point mode in action. I will double tap one of my switches to bring up the menu, just because I have auto tap selected in my settings. And then I will choose it from that menu, and this is what point mode looks like. So you'll see a bar move around on the screen. You'll press the switch once and refine your selection. And here what I'm trying to do is open Safari all the way in the lower right-hand corner. You can see I could really drill down into the coordinates on the screen. Same here. I'll have that bar move around. I'll refine my selection. It's a scanning cursor if you want the technical term. And then if I double tap, I can bring up the menu and I can make selections for either simple actions like a tap, or it could be more advanced like performing a gesture. And from the menu, I can also switch back to the item mode, which is the default. So when would you use item mode? Well, sometimes there are apps that are not conformant to switch control, like they weren't designed to work with switch control. So that's something to know, is that not every app will work with this. I've seen that be an issue with a lot of early learning apps or games, because they typically have their own custom interfaces. And so Apple has been smart enough that when you open up one of those apps that doesn't work with switch control, it will automatically switch into, see what I did there? Switch into point mode. So that way you can still use the app even though it's not switch control compatible. And then the other people that use this a lot are gamers, because a lot of times they will want to go to a specific part on the screen and be able to make that selection without scanning around, because that may take too long. So there's definitely uses for point mode. All right, so a couple of extra features here. I wouldn't call them advanced features. They're more like extra features that are really helpful. We've already explored long press. So again, I love that feature because it gives me a lot of flexibility. You can take one switch and assign multiple actions to it, a primary action and then a secondary action when you press and hold it. There's also device switching. I'm not going to be able to demonstrate that today, but just know that if you know somebody that has multiple Apple devices, there is switch control on the Mac. There's also switch control on Apple TV for entertainment purposes. So what you can do is there's an option in the scanner menu that allows you to switch devices. So I could be reading an ebook on my iPad using switch control to do that. And then when I'm ready to switch over to my Apple TV to watch a movie, I can just select Apple TV from a menu. And then the switch control will be activated on the Apple TV, and then I'll be able to control it with the same switches that I was using to interact with my tablet. So that can be really powerful for accessing a variety of devices with the same interface and the same switches. But what I want to focus on is recipes. So what a recipe does is it allows you to perform a repetitive action. So one of those that I can think of right away is flipping the pages of an ebook. So you're reading an ebook on your iPad. You don't want to have to navigate around each time you want to flip the pages. So with recipes, we basically enter a special mode where each time you press a switch, it performs the same action until you're ready to exit out of that special mode. So recipes are so important that it's worth a demo. What do you think? So let me exit out of there. And then I'm going to show you on the iPad as well how to create a real simple recipe, but there's a lot more that you can do. So recipes are going to be found right where you turn on and off switch control. You're going to find an option called recipes. And there are two that are already created because these are two that are used quite a bit. And the one that I'm going to focus on right now is turn pages. So I'm going to choose turn pages. And the first thing that I need to do is configure my switches. So which switch is going to turn the page from right to left, which one's going to turn it from right, left to right. And then there's other options that I have here. So I want to make sure my stepper, and you can see it's already done some configuration for me because I've used this interface with the same iPad before. But I want to choose the switch and then the action that I want to perform. So that will be a right to left swipe for my stepper. And then for my picker, I'm going to choose a left to right swipe. And then I'll also configure the long press because I need to have some way of exiting that special mode. That's recipes mode if I want to go back to navigating in the typical way. So I want to make sure I select exit recipe here for the long press on one of these switches. I could also set it up. I love using 3 switches when I'm using recipes for this kind of functionality. One will flip the pages from one side to the other. The other one will perform a similar page flip. And then I'll have one that will exit the recipe when I'm finished and I want to go back to other actions on the device. So we have that configured. I could configure the screen as well. You can see here that I have the screen set up to perform a swipe or to exit the recipe with a long press. So once you've done that, then we're ready to use that recipe. So what I'm going to do is bring up my Books app here. Open up a book. Wonder who created this book. This is one of my books, Learning on the Go from Cast Publishing. So I'm going to turn on switch control. I'll just use my triple click home option. Oh. All right, so you can see I'm just advancing through the interface the way that we're used to. And it doesn't matter where I am with my picker, right? So that's the switch that I use to make selections. I'll double tap to bring up the scanner menu. And then within the scanner menu, I'm going to navigate to recipes. So again, I'm going by row first and by columns. I'll choose recipes. And then I want to select the recipe, which is turn pages. All right. So now it lets me know I'm in a special mode called recipes, and it tells me what recipe is activated. So now each time I press these switches, looks like I exited out of recipes for some reason. Let me just do this real quick. Apparently there is something wrong in my settings. So let me just go back. Disable switch control. Maybe that I need to disable some of these switches here. So turn pages. Let's edit this and remove some of these, and that should take care of it. So I want to make sure I just have the options that I need here. All right, let's try again. Cross your fingers. All right, let's see if we can activate that recipe. There we go. All right, so now I'm in this recipes mode. And what I can do is press this switch. Boom, there's my page flip in one direction. Press the other switch. Boom, that's my page flip in the other directions. And then, of course, remember, I have an option here to exit the recipe, which is using long press on one of my switches. So if I press and hold, it says you're back to your default actions. And now I can navigate the rest of the book. All right, so recipes is really powerful. Again, this is another feature that is used a lot by gamers. Sometimes they want to just tap in the same area of the screen repeatedly because they may be in, say, a shooting game or a driving game. And so they will set up a recipe that does just that. Just tap on the screen at that location. So that is the recipes feature.
Thanks so much, Luis. I love using recipes for fun, like Fruit Ninja. But
Yep.
each switch can do a different type of slice. But I love that, just showing folks that we can provide some independence for reading too. I mean, just easily accessing books and PDF files and be able to skim through is great.
Yeah, and when we think about, accessible educational materials, and by the way, I work at the National AIMS Center, we often think of just how you process the information, how you perceive it. But the ability to be able to hold a book and manipulate the book, that's also part of that accessibility piece.
Absolutely.
So with an iPad, you can put the book on the tablet on a stand. So we take care of the holding the book part. But then how about the manipulation? Of being able to flip the pages? Well, then that's where recipes comes in for sure. There's a lot of customization. Again, I'm just showing you some of the basic things. There's a lot more in the book that I shared at the beginning and that you'll have the link to. But just know that, depending on the switch, the scanning mode that you've selected or the scanning style, if you select auto scanning, you'll have some timing options that you can set, like how often or how quickly it's going to scan. I always set this pause on first item option because whenever you go into a column, like when you're navigating by row, right? The first time you select the switch, the picker that you selected, it will sort of go in and select that first column, but it kind of moves kind of quickly by default. And so I'll insert a pause on that first item just to make sure that I don't miss it, just in case it is the option that I want to select. So lots of different options here for customizing the timing. And then there's a switch stabilization feature. So the whole duration is the one that I've used the most. Basically, if you have somebody that makes unwanted switch presses, you can set up a delay so that they have to hold it down for specified amount of time before it's recognized that they've pressed it. We have some options for audio, and this is one of my favorite features here because I often work with students who are blind and who also require switch access. So I only get the most challenging situations, right? So with these audio settings here, you basically get 2 accessibility features for the price of 1. So you can navigate around using switch control, but you can hear the buttons that are selected. You can hear them described. And then it's basically like you're using the VoiceOver screen reader feature at the same time with switch control. And for the speech, you can, just like with VoiceOver, just like the text-to-speech, you can choose different voices, you can choose different speaking rate for how it announces those switch actions. You can simplify the menu for switch control. So that scanner menu, maybe you don't need all the options. And I highly recommend that when you're just starting out to go in and simplify this. Disable those things that you know are not needed at that point. And you can bring them back later as the person becomes more adept with switch control. And then there's also some visual refinements that you can make. You can set up a large cursor. So just it's going to have a, more bold and thicker border. And then you can also change the color, as you can see here. Now, a few apps that I also use with switch control quite a bit, and I only have 4 minutes, so I'm going to go through these fairly quickly, but they're listed in the handout. Shortcuts is a new feature that Apple introduced in iOS 12. What Shortcuts does is provide some automation. So you can chain together a number of actions that can be performed with just one switch press when you combine it with Shortcuts. So I encourage you to check out Shortcuts. There's lots of them already out there available that you can add to Shortcuts. Like there are different workflows that you can add to Shortcuts. And so that can be really helpful. Siri, if the person can still, speak in an intelligible way, then the device can recognize it. That's another way you can combine the two. You can use Siri for some things and then switch control for others. Typing can be a challenge with switch control. So it's important that, you learn how to use QuickType or the word prediction, have that turned on in settings, and then learn how to use it. But there are also some special keyboards that provide special layouts for switch users. These are just two of my favorites that I use. Keeble from AssistiveWare. It's a $20 app. Maybe a little bit more expensive now, but it's around that price range. And then Phraseboard is free. So here's an example of some of the layouts, the configurations in Keeble. You can see that you get higher contrast, you get larger keys. It uses a special font called Dyslexia or Open Dyslexic for dyslexia. But then you can also change the layout so that it's not the usual QWERTY layout. It's a different one optimized for switch users. Here's Phraseboard. So with Phraseboard, you can basically enter an entire phrase just by selecting one of these buttons. So you can do that more easily with switch control. It's a really nice time saver. You can use it even without switch control, just for convenience when you're texting. It's a free keyboard app. AbiliPad is another one. This allows you to create custom keyboards. Here's an example of that. It could be really helpful in an assessment scenario where there's just a few options like A, B, C, D that you want the switch user to be able to select. And look at that, I'm gonna do it on time. So there is a handout, as I mentioned at the beginning, where a lot of this is explained in way more detail. It's bit.ly/switch control overview. Again, that's case sensitive. So make sure you type it in the same way that it appears on the screen with a capital S, capital C, capital O. And again, a reminder, you can also download that Handsfree book. We haven't updated it recently, but the basics of using switch control have remained pretty stable and very similar through all the latest versions of iOS. And that's it. So that's all for me. Here's my website again, luisperezonline.com. And then you can follow me on Twitter at EyeOnAccess, EYEONAXS. Thanks so much, everybody.
Luis, thank you so much. And I'm so glad that we have this recorded for folks to see who are new to this or who need some more practice. Thank you so much for simplifying this for everyone too and showing what's possible with switch access with the iPad. I think we're going to be really excited. We're going to see everyone in person tomorrow, and we'll probably share a little snippet of this and make sure that everybody's aware that this exists on our website for our teams, so they can dive in. I really appreciate you taking the time to be with us, Weiss. We feel very lucky to have you.
I appreciate the opportunity. I know the recording's probably ended at this point, but if any of you have any questions, I'll stick around for a couple of minutes, if you don't mind, Jen.
Okay, no, of course.
So this is your opportunity. I'm here for you. If you have any questions about anything that you just watched, I'll give you a minute or so and you can put it into the chat. And if not,
their minds with what's possible with Switch Use. And I think it's great. We'll make sure to share the link for the book that you wrote with Christopher to show, because he's pretty amazing when you see how he's accessing.
Yeah, you can follow him on Twitter at IamMacking. So you can see some of his videos that are not related to switch control. They're related to other things that he does, like flying drones and the like, and video editing. So check those out. Those are really great. Yeah, and Cheryl said, yeah, there are quite a few videos, so it may take a little bit of time to download the book because of the videos, but we wanted to make sure that in accordance to UDL, that you have multiple means for learning about switch control. So videos and text.
Fantastic.
Awesome. All right, everybody. Thanks so much. Take care and keep on switching.
Thank you. Bye-bye now, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks,
sure.
And see you tomorrow.